On this episode of Doing the Most, we're revisiting Skeeter Pee, a lemonade wine perfect for summer.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
Last year around this time, we released a video about Skeeter Pee. Skeeter Pee is a recipe that's been around for a while, and it's a time-tested way to make a delicious summertime, sparkling, alcoholic lemonade. Now this is not to be confused with hard lemonades, like Mike's Hard Lemonade. It doesn't taste like that at all. It is its own delicious thing, and if you're a new brewer, you should make this at least once, just to try it out. I love the stuff, and my friends do too. So in last year's video, we made 10 gallons worth, and I know that was confusing for some folks. So we wanted to put out another video that shows it just in the 5-gallon form, so there's no confusion about how this is made. The ingredients for this delicious lemonade wine are 96 ounces of 100% lemon juice, 7 pounds of sugar to ferment, 3/4 teaspoon of tannin, water to 4.5 gallons, and a yeast slurry from a previous batch. Eventually you will also need potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate to stabilize, and 1.5 pounds of sugar to back sweeten. And now I will preface this by saying you're gonna have a real tough time finding lemon juice that doesn't have preservatives in it. We're using 2 different brands of lemon juice here, and both of them have preservatives like sodium benzoate and sodium metabisulfite. Now, typically, we would advise against fermenting anything that's got these stabilizing agents in it. However, we're going to be able to ferment this because we're using some pretty hardcore yeast that you just used to ferment a batch, and we're going to be feeding it along the way. And I don't know if this is still considered best practice, but when I first started making this, people were rubber banding paper towels over the top of the lemon juice to let it gas out for a few days in hopes that the preservatives would kind of off gas into the air. I don't know if that's how it actually works. I don't know if it's the equivalent of standing on one leg and waving a rubber chicken over your head, but I do it because that's how I've always done it. Feel free to try it without. Your mileage may vary. And after a few days, we're ready to make it. We have all of our ingredients here, and now I will confess, I'm making a 10-gallon batch because I would like enough to last all summer for family gatherings and other get-togethers, but we will make sure to only show you the 5-gallon version. And so, with a little movie magic, we'll get started. And this really couldn't be easier. You're gonna dump in your sugar, making sure to weigh it out as you go, and then pour in 1 bottle of the lemon juice. Now these are usually sold in 32-ounce bottles, so preferably, hopefully, you'll start out with 3 32-ounce bottles, which in total will give you your 96 ounces. After that's stirred up into kind of a slurry, we'll add our wine tannin. Now this step is optional, you don't have to do this, but it helps kind of round out the palate on this brew. And then we're gonna add in our brewing water up to 4.5 gallons. Now the reason we're going up to 4.5 gallons is because we're going to be adding the other 2 bottles of lemon juice later, and we want to make sure that we don't go over 5 gallons in excess. Our yeast slurry for this batch actually came from the hydromels that we fermented in our collab with Homebrew Ohio. I harvested the yeast off of that and put it in the fridge until I was ready to make this. That said, it's gone a little bit dormant, so I decided to revitalize it with a little bit of GoFirm. Now, be careful because GoFirm does clump up, but just make sure to weigh it out. I'm putting about 6 grams in here. I also put in about a teaspoon of diammonium phosphate, and now we're gonna give that a quick shake, and about a half an hour later, we'll go ahead and dump that into our batch. In it goes. Stir, stir, stir. Lid goes on, and we're fermenting this open with an upturned coffee mug. About 24 hours later, it started to kind of buzz to life, and 48 hours after that, it had lots and lots of foam. Our yeast had taken off and started cutting through all that sugar and all that lemon juice. And then about 1/3 of the way through fermentation, we're gonna go ahead and add a dash of diammonium phosphate. It's about 1/4 teaspoon of diammonium phosphate. And about halfway through fermentation, we'll sprinkle in another pinch of diammonium phosphate and add our second bottle of lemon juice. And then when we're about 2/3 the way through fermentation, we will add that last bottle of lemon juice and one more pinch of diammonium phosphate. And that should be enough yeast nutrient to get it through the rest of this fermentation. Skeeter Pee can sometimes be a slow slog from beginning to end of fermentation. Adding a little bit of diammonium phosphate as you go, kind of when you're adding that extra lemon juice, helps push it over the finish line. Diammonium phosphate, DAP, is usually a pretty good yeast nutrient, up to about 9% alcohol inside your fermenter. At that point, it doesn't really contribute a lot to the yeast. And so I know we didn't take a starting gravity on this. That's because we're going to be adding extra bottles of lemon juice, and so the gravity is not going to be really accurate at the beginning. But if you run it through a batch calculator, it comes out to just under 9% alcohol by volume. So adding DAP here is kind of helping nudge that yeast over the edge. Once that has completed fermentation all the way down to 1.000 on our hydrometer, it's time to stabilize. So we're adding potassium sorbate and potassium metabisulfite just by package instructions. And then about 48 hours later, once that's had time to do its thing and stabilize and keep that yeast from re-fermentation, we will add some Sparkloid. Sparkloid is a fining agent. It's a hot mix. So you put Sparkloid in with some boiling water and then mix that into your batch. While I'm stirring here, I am also doing a little bit of degassing to try and off-gas any suspended carbon dioxide that might get in the way of it clearing. And then we're gonna rack that off about a week later. And at this point, it's mostly clear, but it still has some clearing yet to do. A week later, now we're clear, and I am going to be putting this batch into a keg and carbonating it. Typically, Skeeter Pee is served still. So this is the point where if you're into bottling, you would just go ahead and sweeten with your 1.5 pounds of sugar and put it into bottles. I find it's best crown capped in beer bottles, and so that way you can chill them as you want them and consume them without the waste of the expensive corks. This stuff goes fast. I'm putting mine in a keg so I can sparkle it. And I have always wanted to keg Skeeter Pee and not had the ability to do so. I've always wanted to try it carbonated. So this is actually my first time having Skeeter Pee sparkling. I racked a little bit of the Skeeter Pee into this mason jar with my 1.5 pounds of sugar, mixed that up into a slurry, and then dumped that in the bottom to rack on top of. And as I'm carbonating and rolling this keg around, all of that sugar will disappear into solution. And I wanted this to be a pink lemonade, so I added a little bit of red food coloring. That's about 1/8 of a teaspoon of red food coloring, just to give it a light pink color. You can do this, or you can skip this step. And in the past, I've actually put a Kool-Aid packet in my 5-gallon batch to give it a little berry or strawberry flavor to go along with it. Feel free to try that out too. It can lead to some really fun colors. And there we have it. Time to draw us off a pint and see how it tastes. Crispy and astringent as always. It's got a nice lemonade flavor, but it really is a fermented lemonade flavor. You can taste the fermentation, you can taste the things that the yeast have done in there to alter the lemon juice chemically, which I don't think you would get if you just stabilized and then added the lemon juice. I think it really does have a benefit of fermenting it in the must, and it's just lightly sweet. Now, the original recipe calls for about twice as much sugar on back sweetening, and I just think it's too sweet. I really prefer this less sweet version. I'd love to try this back sweetening with honey. I think it would add a really nice richness to it, and I'm curious to do some A/B testing of a sugar versus honey batch and see where that lands. But this is so good, so incredibly refreshing. When I go out fishing on Sunday afternoons, this is what I take with me. And it really is just one of my favorite things. And like I said, 10 gallons is about what it takes to get through summer with friends and family partaking. So good. So good. Well, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, I would love to encourage you right now to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We do a lot of homesteading and home brewing stuff, and we would really appreciate the ability to share our projects with all y'all and get your feedback on it. Speaking of which, have you made Skeeter Pee? Let us know how it turned out in the comments, particularly if you added some fruit or other flair to it. And as always, you can find us on Instagram and Pinterest at doingthemostokay, and our website is doingthemost.org. Until next time, keep doing the most and enjoy your summer.